Hello, I'm Vladimir Kropotov. Welcome to Decode 2020. Today we will talk about cybercrime infrastructure, past, present, and future. This is a joint research by me and Fyodor Yarechkin. Enjoy! Shortly about us. I'm in the industry for over 15 years. I have incident response background. I led and built incident response teams before, but now I'm working for Trend Micro Research. It's FTR team forward-looking threat research. Further, have doctor degree. He is well known in community, and we both spoke at dozens security conferences, including Hack in the Box, Black Hat. We wrote a number of papers and blogs related to cybercrime investigations, network attacks, new types of attacks and threats, attacks on industrial environments, attacks on telecoms. This is our new research, and we're presenting it here. What is underground hosting or bulletproof hosting? We define underground hosting as a service to host components or infrastructure for any type of illegal or criminal activities. This could be IP addresses, virtual service, dedicated service, fast-flux, proxy, or service to protect criminal assets from DDoS attacks. The hosting hacking infrastructure has been well known for many years, generally since the beginning of Internet. It often was used to host command and control service, but that's not the only thing. Where bigger parts of criminal infrastructure, it used it to host forums, phishing pages, send spam, and initiate DDoS attacks. So what was in the past and the same thing is in the present. In 2015, Trend Micro wrote a paper about underground hosting. That's the story related to the past. And if you are interested, you can read this paper. So for now, we completed updated research on this topic, and we have now 3 papers. First, related to marketplaces. Second, related to hacker infrastructure. And the third paper related to modus of operandi. We can think about this as a front stage, as a market, backstage as a hacking infrastructure, and the modus operandi as something behind the scene. So what is the front stage? The market. What kind of market we have? It's sellers who provide their services. It's buyers who dictate their service demands, what we need to buy and how much we are ready to pay. And of course, it's marketplaces like forums, dedicated shops, messenger platforms, social media platforms, which are the part of underground ecosystem. There are several reasons why bulletproof hosting is used: to maintain anonymity, to keep resources available or alive, and those resources have criminal nature, so in normal situation, they should be taken down by law enforcement or incident response team or search. But since it's bulletproof hosting, they stay alive longer when it's expected. Another part of the procedure to use bulletproof hosting instead of normal one is to make forensics harder, because in normal case, normal providers can give logs, and bulletproof hostings doesn't store the logs as the client. What is the market? It's dedicated providers, as we can see here, or it's underground forums where criminal actors, sellers advertise what we have, what kind of services and prices. And it's even social media and messenger platforms where dedicated groups or secret chats or chats are used to sell services, to make technical support, or for individual conversations between criminals. Dedicated shops are a pretty interesting category. It's kind of electronic shop where goods are either compromised assets or virtual servers or dedicated servers. And we can see the future release, which almost always include geolocation and hardware. It could be number of cores, type of CPUs, memory available, network connection speed, and sometimes the services which allow it on the computer, the ports which are open, or what kind of activity can be conducted from this compromised host or bulletproof hosting. Some criminal actors don't shy and advertise absolute bulletproof hosting. That means that any services are allowed, they not provide logs and many hour climbs. But based on our experience, it's really a rare case where hosting organized the way it's absolutely bulletproof in the long run. So many hostings operate just by moving assets from one provider to another. Some hostings are more mature, but very costly, and bulletproof server can cost several $1,000s per month. Criminal infrastructure is not just a hosting. It could be other services like DDoS protection of criminal resources. And we see both services provided by criminals to criminals or use and abuse of legitimate DDoS protection services to protect criminal infrastructure, like underground forums. Some hosters, which are legitimate, accepting cryptocurrencies. What does it mean for criminals? It's really good. We can keep their anonymity while paying in cryptocurrency and buying services. So it's not full bulletproofs, but what's the way how criminals buying resources and hosting for short-term projects like phishing campaign. There is no need to maintain hosting for a long time. So as long as it survives 1-2 days, criminals get your profit. Social media platforms sometimes are used to advertise bulletproof hosting. We were able to find this kind of advertisement on Twitter, VK, and our social media platforms. So it's not underground resources, but underground services advertised there too. That was a brief market overview. But what is on the backstage? On the backstage, we can see implementation of bulletproof services, and there are a number of categories like dedicated or virtual private service, hosting on compromised assets, privacy and anonymizing services like proxies, VPNs, and even domain provisioning services. But how you can spot underground hosting? Let's see a simple example here. Let's look at the simple example. At this particular autonomous system, over 70% of IP addresses related to malicious or criminal activity. This is one of signs that this autonomous system related to bulletproof hosting, because for normal autonomous system, it's normally not easy to maintain this activity, especially in the long term. That's another example, another IP range. And in the description for this IP range, we can see several interesting things. Owners mention spam house and security researchers and ask them not to take down. And among that, we can see that it's managed by KGB, which is quite strange. If we think about hosting, about dedicated servers, there are several options for criminals to provide with services. First of all, it's in-house infrastructure. Second option is abuse of commercial infrastructure providers. And the third big option is hosting on compromised assets. Let's look at real world examples of this. In-house infrastructure actually means that service providers control not only remote access to servers, but they control normally building or data center where equipment is located. For underground hosting, in-house infrastructure often means not just that actors have access to server farms or access to the building of data center, but often that means that it's exactly in-house. So this is a screenshot from the video shared by Security Service of Ukraine when we raided Bulletproof Hoster. And this server farm, server racks were located at the basement of private building. And the suspicious thing for this building was energy consumption, which was way above comparing to the buildings around. Criminals are often abuse commercial infrastructure to provide their bulletproof service. What we do, we rent several IP spaces among several hosting providers. And when abuse came, we react to this abuse not by removing content, but by moving assets from one IP address to another. Or if abuses are lost in, we're moving assets from one data center to another. So formally, we follow the process and react to abuses, but criminal infrastructure is still alive. And that's why in our security logs, we often see how IP addresses are changed day by day or week by week in the criminal infrastructures. Among discussions on the underground forums, it's easy to see well-known hosting providers which have legitimate business and criminals suggesting how to abuse their business processes to maintain bulletproof hosting infrastructure above this legitimate infrastructure. And that's why we see on the in-house bulletproof hostings, it's often way more services permitted comparing to infrastructure which are built on top of commercial infrastructure. Hosting uncompromised assets. It's another interesting case. For this kind of scenario, we can often see in advertisement things like your dedicated server will not have admin access, or another funny thing. The warranty for the server is, for example, 24 or 48 hours. And if the owner of the server changes the password, that's not a warranty case. That means that if criminal actor who purchased access to compromised asset is very active and the real owner of the asset seeing this activity and figure it out what the server was compromised, change its password, was the problem of the criminal and not of the service provider. In the dedicated shops where this kind of assets are sold, we can see location, we can see type of access, a level of privileges, and many other things and parameters. And this kind of compromised assets are very important part of criminal infrastructure, because if actor knows precise location like a zip code in the United States, and the actor trying to monetize stolen credit card to avoid anti-fraud system detection, the actor will choose computer nearby and will pretend as he is a legitimate owner of the credit card which sits in the cafe nearby or somewhere around. So anti-fraud system will not trigger extra rules to initiate second factor authentication for the payments. Fast-flux is another type of bulletproof infrastructure. And the idea here is use of big pools of IP addresses and move assets around with IP addresses so fast, so law enforcement, search, or incident response teams cannot follow up the attack at the speed we change the addresses, and effectively unable to take down infrastructure in the reasonable time. On this screenshot, you see how actor advertised this service. It's important to know that one of the indicators of fast-flux is short timeouts for DNS records. If you see what DNS records have pretty low TTL and refresh rate, of course, this could be used for load balancing of big sites, but this is an often indicator of fast-flux activity. Some underground hosters, among with dedicated servers or virtual private servers, offer DDoS services and other types of services. So why DDoS is important? Think about underground forums, where several forum owners compete with each other for the criminal market. Of course, in this case, there is no rules like in legitimate business, so we can easily DDoS competitors. That's why we have to protect their assets like Holy Grail, and that's why we did part of our research based on underground forums, because it's an interesting thing that almost often should be hosted on bulletproof service providers. Among the DDoS, another interesting thing is protection from scraping. If you think about forums and security researchers, we're trying to scrape underground forums and analyze the messages and advertisements sent by criminals. But what criminals do? Normal people use CAPTCHA to protect their assets from scraping and from bots. But the problem is criminals are able to solve CAPTCHAs with bots, AI, or other methods. We found that for some underground forums, there are more advanced styles of CAPTCHA, like a random question related to criminal codes, to mathematical calculations, or questions like how to implement this action if you have Linux console. This kind of CAPTCHA filter new buyers from accessing a forum content. And it filters foreigners because many questions are related to local culture. So it's impossible to answer these questions with Google Translate or if you are not native speaker. And this is an example of the criminal guide, how to monetize logs stolen from compromised computers. So obvious things to monetize logs collected by stealers is corrupt cryptocurrencies, corrupt credit cards, because it's low-hanging fruits. But some criminals already able to fund accounts related to cloud services and monetize this kind of accounts for their own profit. Let's look here to the criminal infrastructure, how it looks like. For this case study, we choose a list of underground forums and collected information about them, including autonomous systems and IP addresses used over the time. And we try to visualize this information using several approaches and enrich this information with the data sources we have. On this map, you can see a number of IP addresses used in particular country over the last several years by underground forums from the list we have. But this information gives us some sense what is going on. But to understand the situation, we have to analyze several slices because different forums have a different strategy to host. And on this map, we can see activities or how one forum with name SkyFraud was moving around over the time, over the countries. And we see almost 4,000 IP addresses used by this particular forum. And the reason for that, just because this forum used fast-flux technologies for hosting during 9 days. If we do slices by time, by IP addresses, by autonomous systems over time, we can see a better picture comparing to the single slice of data we collected. If we look at the hosting of SkyFraud over the time, we can see that just in 2016, this forum was hosted all around the world and used really big IP space. But before and after, the hosting strategy was changed, maybe because forum owners found more stable hosting of our type. We visualize it in our criminal shop, black service, and on the horizontal axis, you can see years. On vertical axis, you can see countries, and the size of the circle means how many days this asset spent in particular country. And we can see quite big circles, which means that, for example, in 2016, this asset spent almost all year in the United States. If we do in our slides, we can see transitions between autonomous systems over the time. And we can see what Alibaba were used quite often among several other autonomous systems, while our autonomous systems were used at just short period of time. For now, of course, we witnessed evolution of types of the services provided related to criminal assets and hosting. For example, here is a mobile workspace. Criminals provide all-in-one solution in particular geographical location like European country with particular operation system and environment and hardware which is secured and available for criminals to commit their crime. We witness shift to mobile infrastructure, especially in the terms of privacy services like VPNs, because mobile proxies is really effective way, especially proxies based on the compromised assets. From security systems, it looks like a legitimate person with legitimate phone accessing to the asset. It allows to avoid anti-fraud systems, not only in banking, but think about marketing campaigns. For example, everybody can get €5 for registering account for new electronic shop. What criminals doing? We buying access to thousands of proxies and registering thousands of accounts and collecting all the money from this campaign in just several hands. So the campaign looks like work from marketing point of view, but the problem is that, for example, over 50% of participants were actually bots controlled by criminals. IoT equipment is used more and more often for criminal purposes because it's updated not so often, it's easy to hack, it contains predictable passwords, and it not contain logs because for many IoT equipment, logs are removed as long as device was rebooted. So it's a perfect combination for criminals to maintain their services. What is the future of underground hosting infrastructure? What we expect growth in 3 areas. It's growth in the cloud because clouds are flexible. We already saw what some criminal groups using cloud for their command and control infrastructure, but clouds bring for criminals way more interesting benefits. For example, with cloud technologies, we can move their virtual machines from one data center to another in minutes using embedded tools. So we can easily react to abuses and keep infrastructure alive. The second group is use of new type of devices. And we consider here IoT, and we already saw IoT botnets, but I think this will go into the scale. And in near future, we expect that industrial IoT equipment, especially with embedded SIM cards, will be targeted by criminals and used by criminals to maintain their services and host criminal infrastructures. And the third big thing we think which coming up is a use of alternative networks like satellite link. Think about this like criminals can receive data from satellite without exposing precise location. That's a real profit for criminals. Or peer-to-peer networks or networks alternative to internet. Networks such ZeroNet can be abused by criminals in near future. What we learned in this research, there is almost no ultimate bulletproof hosting, and criminals abuse difference in the laws, abuse local conflicts and bad relations between the government by putting part of the infrastructure in one country and another part in another with the countries which are not collaborate at law enforcement level. We abuse our type of processes, formally trying to react to abuses while keeping infrastructure alive by moving this infrastructure around different hosting providers or different data centers. It's a tricky process, but it's a time game. And faster we can react to criminal activities and effectively take down the infrastructure, the better internet we get. So hope you learned something from this talk and enjoyed it. Feel free to ask questions.